Have you ever had a client say they want to change, but then don't? Or maybe you've had someone stuck between two choices and you're just not sure how to help them without taking over the conversation and telling them what to do. What if I told you that there was a framework that you can use today to help people explore change on their own terms without pressure or any persuasion? Hi, my name is Maya and I'm an aspiring psychologist documenting my journey. I hadn't heard about this framework, motivational interviewing, until I started my support worker role. I never heard it at university or seen much literature on it really. So it's only when I started working as a support worker that they gave us training on this. And more recently, I've had some study material for it when applying for a clinical internship. And since then, I've used it with people in mental health settings, as well as with family and friends, because this is a very valuable conversational tool that you can use with anyone, whether that's clients, family, anyone that you want to start supporting now. A quote that really encapsulates the whole purpose of motivational interviewing is this: people are more persuaded by the reasons they themselves discover than those given to them by others. And that is the whole principle behind motivational interviewing. It's not about fixing or trying to give advice. It's about guiding in a way that empowers people to discover their own reasons for change. So there's 5 key sections that I want to go over in this video to really provide the skills to you that you can use after this episode. Firstly, why should aspiring psychologists learn about motivational interviewing? Secondly, what actually is it and what psychological principles is this technique rooted in? Thirdly, how is it applied in practice? Fourthly, the 4 stages of motivational interviewing, how the conversation is actually structured. And number 5, the core skills that you need to actually navigate this sort of conversation and the traps to avoid. Okay, let's get into it. So number 1, why aspiring psychologists should learn about motivational interviewing. One of my goals of this podcast is to help aspiring psychologists develop the skills they need to actually become a clinical psychologist, to get onto the doctorate. These are skills that they don't teach you in the undergraduate. It's things that people pick up as they go from one work experience to another. And I just want to share this information so it's more widely spread and that you can start helping people with their mental health today. So, motivational interviewing is one of the most powerful tools that you can use. And here's why. It's a communication tool. It's a way of thinking that can help you gain a deeper understanding of someone and help them to transition from one way of thinking to another. So number 1, it's a powerful communication tool. Number 2, it's a person-centered and strengths-based tool. So in this technique, you're not fixing someone, you're guiding them to find their own solutions. And it helps you build core therapeutic skills that every clinical psychologist needs. Firstly, active and reflective listening. Secondly, empathy. And thirdly, building rapport with the client. In short, it makes you a better communicator and it builds the foundational skills for a clinical psychologist. Okay, now, what actually is motivational interviewing? Motivational interviewing is a person-centered, goal-oriented communication method that helps people who have ambivalence, which is basically mixed feelings, about a certain change they want to make in their life. It's not traditional therapy, but it can be integrated with techniques such as CBT or ACT. Think of it like a style of talking and listening. So this method was introduced by William Miller in 1983. And there's 2 psychological theories that this method is rooted in. And this is important if you're an aspiring clinical psychologist, because for DCLIN-SCI applications, for assistant psychologist applications, they want you to demonstrate how you have used psychological principles in practice and what you've learned from that. So this is something that you can use in your applications to show how you've applied psychology in practice. These are the psychological theories that this method is based on. Firstly, self-determination theory. This theory suggests that people are naturally or intrinsically motivated to grow and to learn. And that motivation flourishes when we have autonomy, competency, and connection. And this is something that motivational interviewing really emphasizes. It emphasizes that we put the client in the driver's seat and make sure that they have this sense of agency and autonomy and that they can make decisions in their own life. Then we have competencies. So we want to make sure that the client feels confident enough to make this change, and we want to help them build that confidence. And then feeling connected is through showing empathy and affirmations and building that rapport with the client. Now, the second theory is cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is the mental discomfort that we feel when our values and our beliefs don't align with our behaviors. So, for example, someone might really value health, but then continue to smoke. So these kind of clash, and there's some kind of mental resistance and discomfort because of that clash. So motivational interviewing helps to gently explore that discomfort, but without judgment. Okay, how is motivational interviewing applied in practice? So originally, this method was used in addiction and physical health related conditions, but now it's used across mental health, in education, in disability support, even family dynamics. This method is especially helpful for people who feel stuck or uncertain about making a change, so have mixed feelings, and need support building confidence to make that change. Motivational interviewing is built on collaboration, acceptance, so providing that non-judgmental space for them to explore their different options, and evocation, which basically means encouraging or guiding the client to discover their own reasons, their own motivations. So for example, rather than saying, I think you should quit smoking, it's really bad for you, you'd say something like, okay, so what's worked for you in the past, or what's most important to you right now? Okay, we're on to number 4, the 4 stages of motivational interviewing. There can be kind of a flow to it, but this is the general structure that is helpful to keep in mind. So number 1 is engaging. So building that trust, building that connection, that rapport with the client. Number 2 is focusing. So zeroing in on what issue matters most to the client, because you might think it's one thing, but actually to them something else completely is more important. Like when I was practicing this with my mum, I went into it thinking that she would say something like, I want to exercise more, because that's kind of what I've been pushing for her. I've really been encouraging her to start exercising and telling her how important that is for her health and for her brain and all these different things. So I thought that's what we'd be talking about, but we talked about something completely different. She didn't even mention exercise. So that kind of goes to show that you really need to put your assumptions aside and allow the client to put forward what is most valuable, most important to them. Okay, so that's focusing. Number 3 is evoking. We mentioned this word before, and this is the main part, the meat of motivational interviewing. This is where we explore the client's own reasons for change, so where we draw out that motivation. And a lot of literature says that there's 4 components to motivation, and those are desire, so whether they actually want to change; ability, whether they think that they're actually capable and confident in making that change; reasons, whether they have their own strong reasons to change; and need for change. How much do they actually need that change right now? And only once you figure out the motivation and you build the basics of why they want to do it, how confident they are in it, once you build that, then you can move on to the planning stage. And that's the fourth stage, planning. So once they're ready, and only once they're ready, you can help them create a doable plan to move forward. One key mistake that a lot of people make is jumping to the solution and the planning before they've built up that foundational basis of the reasons for that client to change and the motivation. And I make this mistake quite a lot, actually, I've realized. I think as humans, we have a tendency to want to solve the problem and to just jump to the solution too soon. We need to remember to stay with the client at the level of commitment that they're at, not what we want for them. Motivational interviewing teaches you to listen out for quote unquote change talk, which is basically strong commitment language, such as, okay, I really want to do this, or I need to make this change. I need to quit smoking. Otherwise, I'll end up really ill. Like, this is really important to me. Sometimes what I have found in practice videos that I've seen is that they use like a scale. So they might ask the client, how important is this change for you right now on a scale of 1 to 10? And if they say like 6, then you might be like, okay, why is it a 6 and not a 2? And then they dive into their own reasons for it being so high up. And then you could be like, okay, what would it take for that to become an 8 or a 9? And they can kind of explore maybe their barriers to why the change isn't right for them right now. Okay, so now that we've covered the structure, the framework, the basics of motivational interviewing, this is probably the most important part, because this is how you navigate a conversation with motivational interviewing. These are the core skills and the traps that a lot of people fall into. So for effective motivational interviewing, there are 4 key things that you want to be doing as the conversation develops. The first thing is open-ended questions. This is so important. You really want to avoid kind of yes/no questions and doing too many of those in a row, because then it can become quite rigid and you're not getting the depth and the thought out of the client. So you want to ask questions like, out of everything that we could talk about today, what matters most to you right now? Or instead of listing out the benefits that you think are important, ask them what they think the benefits are. What benefits do you see for yourself if you did make this change? And the aim here is to draw out detail and thought and emotion and start to explore how they feel about this certain decision or their relationship with alcohol or whatever it is that they want to make a change in. Yeah, so open-ended questions. The second one is affirmations, but you want to make these affirmations rooted in strengths and effort rather than firstly based on appearance. You don't want to do that because that's kind of inappropriate, but also just like vague kind of praise or like overly praising, like, oh my God, you've come to this session and you're thinking about change. That is so amazing. These are kind of vague and it can become a little bit patronizing. So you really want to just focus on strengths-based and effort-based affirmations. For example, showing up today shows real persistence, or despite all your setbacks in the past, you're still trying. So that shows a lot of commitment. And then the third thing is reflections. A good way to keep a conversation going and keep the client kind of elaborating on a train of thought is by reflecting back to them what you've heard. And this kind of shows that you've understood them and you've heard them. And it's also to check whether you've understood correctly. And if you haven't, then they might correct you or they might add on to what you said. Also, these kind of reflections help the client hear their thoughts more clearly when they're kind of said out loud and repeated. It helps them like digest their own thought process a bit better. And you can do this through simple reflections. So this can be just repeating the last few words that they said. Like, okay, so I'm hearing that you're feeling very stressed at work. Or maybe they say, yeah, I've just, this and that has been happening. Oh, my kids are really driving me crazy and I'm just feeling so burnt out. You could repeat the last two words, like, you're feeling really burnt out. And then they'll be like, yeah, like, oh, there's just so much going on right now. And then they carry on and elaborate on that train of thought. And you can draw out more feelings and thoughts, and maybe they'll come to their own conclusions through that. So simple reflections, just repeating back what they said, and more complex reflections where you add emotion or meaning to what they've said. You could say something like, okay, so what I'm hearing is you feel stuck because you feel like you're being pulled in loads of different directions. Is that right? So kind of naming the emotions that they're feeling and their reasons, and adding meaning to what they're saying. And side note, even just naming the emotions, so just asking them how they feel about something, is already something that a lot of people don't stop and think about, and can be quite therapeutic in and of itself. And lastly, summaries, which are very similar to reflections, but you basically want to use this to wrap up all the key points that they've said, to maybe wrap up a topic. And if you feel like they're ready to transition onto the next steps, like an action plan, then a summary can be a nice way to check that you've understood what they've said, their reasons, their motivations, and what kind of strategies they've come up with that they feel they could do. So summaries are useful for checking your understanding of what the client has said and to move forward. Now, some common traps that you want to avoid. Some of these we've already mentioned, but jumping into planning before building motivation. This is a key one. I've already said it. This is so important. Stay with the client's level of commitment and look out for strong commitment language before you move on to planning. Okay, blaming. This is something that the client might do themselves. So they might blame their family or their work or just how hard life is and loads of different external factors. While it's good to acknowledge that there's external factors that get in the way of their change, you don't want to dwell on that. You want to kind of explore, okay, what can we do about that if you feel like this is a real barrier? Information dumping. People can often feel more overwhelmed and resistant when they just get a load of information thrown at them. If you think back to when someone has tried to change your view on a topic, they'll just kind of bombard you with their side of the argument, their reasoning, their evidence, all these different things. I don't know about you, but I found myself just switching off completely when that happens. Not to say that I'm not open to a debate, but there is some kind of level of resistance and frustration that builds up in me when that happens. So this is something that you want to avoid. You want to avoid dumping loads of information on them to prove a point or to strengthen your argument. This isn't an argument. This is just a space for the client to discover what they think and what's important to them. Okay, so we want to provide useful information briefly when it's useful and relevant, but we don't want to overwhelm them with too much information. And that leads me on to my next one, which is assuming that you know what's best and like you're the expert because you have a psychology degree or whatever else it is. You really want to change that mindset to the client is the expert. They've experienced their own life. They've tried this change probably multiple times before and have failed, and they have their own experiences and views that have shaped the way they are now. So you're not the expert here. They are. We really want to give them that kind of sense of agency and competency, and we want them to think of the change that they want to make for themselves. So the key thing to keep in mind is to meet the client at the level of commitment that they're at and not yours. One thing that you can do to check yourself maybe in this kind of conversation is to think, am I listening more than I am talking? They should be talking for most of this conversation. And am I guiding rather than telling them what to do? I hope this has helped. You can practice this with family, with friends, whatever job you're in. If you're working in mental health, you can definitely start practicing these tools and trying to think more in a person-centered way. Let me know how that goes for you. Reflect on it, see what's working, what's not working. Thank you so much for listening, for being here. I will link down below any resources that I have. You can easily find information on this technique online. If you have found this helpful, please make sure to follow if you're listening on a podcast platform, or subscribe if you're on YouTube. I am so appreciative of it. And there's plenty more coming your way as I document my journey, as I learn and develop more skills. Let's figure out how to become clinical psychologists together. Okay, thank you so much for being here, and I'll speak to you in the next one. Bye.